Hello, can I please ask everyone to take their seats? Good morning, ladies. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to the first general meeting of the autumn, and it is so good to see so many of you here present today. Those who don't know me, I'm Farzana Seddon, the new president of KCWC. Today we have a fantastic speaker, so without further ado, I would like to invite Eve Mitleton-Kelly, who is in charge of our program, to introduce our speaker. Thank you.
I'll get it. Could we have the... I'm just getting it. I'll get it. Okay. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. I cannot tell you how pleased I am to welcome Rebecca Salter. You will realize by the end of our conversation how very special today's discussion is, because Rebecca is the first female president of the Royal Academy, and she is the 27th. So the 27th president and the first female. And the Royal Academy was founded in 1768. Rebecca is a British abstract artist who lives and works in London. Formerly, she was a ceramicist. She's best known as a painter and printmaker, and her particular specialty is the combination of Western and Eastern traditions in Japanese woodblock printing, an art form she studied in Japan at the Kyoto City University of the Arts. And I know that today we do have some visitors from Japan, and welcome. Many private and public collections, such as the Tate, the British Museum, Yale Center for British Art, and the Yale University Art Gallery include her works. And we will talk a little about her work later this morning. She is an author and has been twice an artist in residence at the Joseph and Annie Albers Foundation in Connecticut. Welcome, Rebecca.
Thank you for
I am
inviting me to join you
absolutely
this morning.
delighted you're joining us today. I would like to start by discussing the summer exhibition. Now, most of our members would be very familiar as visitors to the exhibition, but I think very few of us probably understand the huge amount of background work that goes on. I once saw a film about it, and I was stunned. So can you tell us a little about the summer exhibition? For example, I know that you receive more than 13,000 entries from the public. That's without the Royal Academicians, because the Royal Academicians have the right to send 6 works each, and there are 125 Royal Academicians. So take us through the process.
So I'd like to start by going right back to 1768. Please. So in December 1768, a group of artists met with George III and said they'd like to form a Royal Academy. And George III thought this was a very good idea. And he supported those founding artists, led by the president, Joshua Reynolds, to found the Royal Academy. So that was December. I think it was December the 10th. So that's a very important date in the sort of history of the Royal Academy. And it also means, by the way, that the sitting president always has to stand for re-election every year, round about the 10th of December. So that will be me again in a couple of months' time. So there they met, they decided they were going to have an academy, and what they wanted to do, they wanted a place where they could meet up and a place where they could show their own work. So then they went away on their Christmas holidays, or whatever you did in 1768. Then in January, they came back. I think it was January the 2nd, 1769, and they thought, what we need is a school. We need to teach the next generation of artists. So they founded the Royal Academy Schools, and I know we're going to talk about that later. This all seemed like a very good idea. Then, of course, somebody goes, where are we going to get the money from for all this? So they invented the summer exhibition, in effect. And it's the perfect model. So every year we hold the summer exhibition, and I'm sure many of you will have been to it. And the money we make from that summer exhibition helps to fund the schools. So it's a perfect little ecosystem. And it's obviously grown over the years, and it is now, we proudly say, and who knows if it's true, the largest open submission art exhibition in the world. So we get, I mean, this year we had, I think, 15,000 submissions in the first selection. So what happens is all those works come in digitally. Historically, they used to come in person into the building. The numbers were not as huge then. It was maybe a few thousand used to come into the building. And there was this massive debate, you know, when it became possible to do it digitally. A lot of academicians said, no, it's very, you know, we must see the actual work and you can't judge it from a photograph. But the argument about it being more democratic to do it digitally ultimately won out. Because the truth is, if you're a sculptor in the Shetland Islands, for example, to actually ship a sculpture to the Royal Academy on the off chance it'll get through the first selection is unbelievably expensive. However, you can sit online in the Shetland Islands, photograph your sculpture and send it to us for nothing, basically, for the application fee. So we now do it completely digitally. It takes us a week to do the first judging. It's a circle of hell because you're in a darkened room for several hours a day. It's done anonymously, so we have absolutely no idea who the work is by. What we do have is a little scaled, so you get a photograph of the actual work, then next to it is a little black square which tells you roughly what shape it is, and next to it is I think it's supposed to be a sort of 6-foot person, so it gives you a very quick indication as to how big it is. So we just go through those, and you only need one person to say yes for it to go through to the next round. And generally speaking, on the Summer Exhibition Committee, we've just finished forming it for next year, and we've got the first meeting next week. So there are usually between 8 and 10 academicians on that selection committee. So we always have, obviously, an architect to do the architecture room, a sculptor, painters, and then printmakers. And then I chair the Summer Exhibition Committee, that group, which means I don't actively choose the work or hang one of the rooms. I'm a bit like a referee, so I break up the fights, if there are any. Of course, there aren't any fights ever. Historically, there have been some epic fights, because what happens is that, you know, all this work comes in, and, you know, somebody will go, oh, I want that in my gallery, so they'll kind of go off with something. And I've heard these stories of, you know, days gone by, and they'd hang it on the wall and they'd go home, and then somebody who coveted it would come in really early the next morning, take it off the wall and put it in their gallery. This does not happen now. It's much better organised. So we go through the first 15,000 and we whittle that down to roughly 1,500. So the rate of attrition is pretty tough. Those 1,500 are then physically delivered to the Royal Academy. So by now, the first selection is roughly March, and then on one day in May, roughly May, early May, we all turn up in the Royal Academy, and you may have seen this. The BBC makes a programme about this every year. Yes. You may have seen it. We all sit in a row, and our art handlers literally walk past with them, and we go, yes, no, and it's, again, pretty brutal. You get a cross on them. I mean, the historic is a D for doubtful. That means you get through, and a cross is you're out. The reason it's doubtful is, so we've whittled it down to 1,500 coming in. We then whittle that down again to maybe around 1,900. Then all those works are sort of distributed around the galleries, but it's only when you actually get into the sort of nitty-gritty of hanging, it's only at that point that you make a final decision, because There will be a work that you've accepted and you just think, you know, it's just too big, or the colour can't make it work. So my advice to anybody you ever meet who wants to get into the summer exhibition is do a very small painting. Because there will come a point on the last but one day when you're trying to finish your gallery and you'll walk around saying, has anybody got anything this size with a bit of red in it or something? So that is roughly how it... So each member of the committee is given one gallery to hang, usually, and so the print rooms tend to be, if you've been to the exhibition, very densely hung, because the prints, obviously because they're editioned, sell very well. Because the aim for us is to sell, because we need to make money. So the aim is to sell work from the summer exhibition. So that's roughly how it works. So we hang all the galleries, and then when we've done that, then the next stage is what's called sanctioning day, which is I lead all the committee round the galleries, and we go into each gallery and we look at it, we agree that it looks okay, it's not being sort of, I don't know what the right word is, disrespectful to people's work. I mean, we try and do the absolute best for every piece of work that comes in. What's very unusual about the Royal Academy Summer Exhibition is that, you know, obviously we have the open submission work that comes in. We have work by academicians. We have work by honorary academicians. So artists like, for example, Anselm Kiefer generally sends a piece every year. Then we have a certain number of invited artists, but we mix them all up. So it's not the case that the, in inverted commas, famous artists get the best spot and the open submission people are in the worst spot, you know, by the exit, by the loos or something. So what's interesting about it is that it's all mixed up. Everything is valued equally. Then the other thing, and again, people, if you've been round, you'll know that there's no label on the work telling you who it's by. It's all done by number. And again, what this does is it means the audience is, the visitors are not going round looking at the name and thinking, oh, I've heard of them, they're famous. There's no information on the wall. You've got the little booklet, but what it means is that your initial reaction is you and your eyes and what catches your eye. And that, again, is, I think, one of the things people enjoy about it.
Yes,
They
absolutely.
get to choose. They get to make their own.
Yes, because you can have a painting selling at £100,000 next to one that's 250.
Yeah.
That is the beauty of it.
Yeah.
And, oh, I love the little books. In fact, this year, I took my granddaughter. It was her first time, and I bought her a book as well and a pen. And I taught her what I do, because I make notes and so on. And you'd be amazed and delighted that a 10-year-old is now hooked on the summer exhibition.
That's very good. That's exactly what we want.
Okay, now the Royal Academicians, as we said, they're about 125 at the moment. And Rebecca was telling me that the oldest senior academician, a senior one is over 75?
Yeah.
Is 102. Can you believe it? And she is still working. She's still painting. Can you tell us a little about it?
Yes, so our oldest academician is Diana Armfield, who, as Eve said, is 102, and she's still painting regularly and submitting to the summer exhibition every year. So, yeah, I mean, we've almost got, I think at the moment, we've got 70 academicians under 75 and 55 over 75, so we've almost reached parity between seniors and the younger ones. But it's the ones under 75 who are involved more in the running of the Royal Academy. So there are 4 officers of the Royal Academy, 4 historic roles. President, which is me currently, then the keeper, and I was the keeper before I became president. The keeper looks after the Royal Academy schools, the treasurer, and those 3 must be academicians. And the 4th post historically was called the secretary, but we've now combined that with the much more, this is what he really does, chief executive. So our secretary and chief executive, who's Axel Ruger at the moment, and he's not an academician, he's a professional.
One thing which is rather scandalous is that Royal Academicians, when it started, There were only 2 women.
Yeah, well, you say only 2 women, but to have 2 women in 1768 was probably
Yes.
quite good, actually. Because, I mean, how many women painters? You know, it was pretty extraordinary to have
Can
2
you
women.
remind us who they were?
So the 2 women at the founding of the Royal Academy were Angelica Kaufmann and Mary Moser. So there we are. We had 2 women in 1768, and then this is where it gets very embarrassing,
Yes.
because the next woman was not a full academician until 1936, and that was Dame Laura Knight.
That is the scandalous bit.
Yeah, but we're
Yes.
making up for lost time now. We're
Yes,
getting on
yes,
to it.
absolutely. Right, this is Joshua Reynolds, of
Ah, so,
course.
yes,
And
right
can
on
you
s-
just put him back,
Yeah,
please?
I'll put Joshua Reynolds back, and then I'll show you the...
Yes, because when you enter the forecourt, that is who you will see, and very often he's got a flower garland around his
He
neck.
has a garland for the summer exhibition, yeah, usually.
So would you like to take us through some of the slides?
So in 2018, for our 250th anniversary, before the building had, this is the new part of the building that we renovated, 6 Burlington Gardens, and this was before the building was properly open and the heating was on. So you can see we've all got our coats on. It's incredibly, unbelievably cold. So we assembled as many as we could for a photograph, and I think, now who's the oldest one there? So right in the centre, you can see sitting in a wheelchair with sort of sandy-coloured trousers. That's Trevor Dannett, he lived to 101. And Diana Armfield is in the front row, 3rd from the right. And at the time, so they were the same age, so they were probably just under 100 at the time. So that's the assembled, as many as we could assemble on that historic day. So that's the building we renovated, 6 Burlington Gardens, which originally was the Senate House for the University of London. And now, as you know, we've joined the 2 buildings together. We have this expanded campus.
And did you want to show us some of the summer exhibition?
I don't know whether we've got a picture of the summer exhibition. That's an internal courtyard, which is between the 2 buildings, which is used by the schools and the staff, but the public can't get into that. But it's a lovely sort of hidden space. Oh, now I took this one during lockdown. So on the 17th of March 2020, together with a lot of other organisations, we had to close the Royal Academy. And Axel and I walked out of the gate together and looked at each other, and we had no idea. Like most people, we had no idea. I mean, I think naively at one point we thought it might be 3 weeks that we'd be closed. I mean, I don't know what we were thinking. But of course, at the time, we had exhibitions in the building, of course, that we'd had to shut literally with no minute's notice. So we had security, obviously, on site throughout the pandemic, rattling around the 2 buildings, looking after everything. So Axel and I cycled in. That's my old bicycle there, very embarrassingly old bicycle. Axel and I cycled into the Royal Academy every Saturday morning with cake. And we had cake and tea with the security staff. And I took this photograph because it took less than 3 weeks for weeds to appear in the courtyard.
Goodness.
And I know, and I just thought, isn't that interesting how quickly, you know, nature doesn't really care about us at all. Nature took over almost immediately. So that was the lockdown. So this was this year's, this was the banner for this year's summer exhibition, the theme of which was broadly sort of the environment and the climate crisis. And it was a very interesting theme to work with, because every year amongst the Summer Exhibition Committee there's a coordinator who broadly shapes what the theme. And this year it was Alison Wilding, who's a wonderful sculptor who you may know her work. And she chose this topic. And what you never know is how that topic will resonate when it goes out towards the open submission. But interesting this year, a lot of people actually worked to the subject.
Yes.
A lot of people did work related to it. So you never know. That's what makes the summer exhibition reinvents itself every year, and that's why it works, I think.
Yes. And even when it moved to the winter.
Well, yes. So obviously, so that photograph of lockdown was March 2020, and we had, in fact, just done the first selection for Summer Exhibition 2020. So we'd done the first stage. And Axel and I were determined that we were not going to be the first team in the history of the Royal Academy that cancelled the summer exhibition, because it carried on right through both wars. So we were absolutely determined that we had to keep it going, which meant we had to shift it to the autumn. And one of the other important things about the Royal Academy Summer Exhibition is that there's a whole ecology around it that it helps to support. So picture framers, you know, all those prints that get sold, they all need framing, so there's work produced from that. The work needs to be delivered and collected, so sort of van drivers and delivery people. So there's and print, you know, a lot of print studios make print editions for academicians and other artists, and that's all work that is within the ecology of the art world. So we were very aware that this was a way we could offer support, because a lot of people's livelihoods had just vanished.
Exactly, absolutely. Would you like to tell us a little about your own work now, please?
Yeah, so let's see if we got. So, so Eve mentioned that. So I actually trained in ceramics in Bristol. And I mean, we're talking, I mean, I graduated in 1977 and I was obsessed with the idea of going to Japan. And now I cannot understand how I managed to arrange it without email. Because I must have written letters to people and waited for answers. I honestly don't know how I managed it. Anyway, I did somehow manage to get a place at Kyoto City University of the Arts, and I managed to get a scholarship from the Lever Hume Fund. The trickiest part was getting a visa, actually, at the time. You needed a Japanese citizen as a guarantor to actually go as a student, so that was a challenge. But ultimately, I arrived in Japan and I spent 2 years in the university. I mean, I'd been a little economical with the truth on my application form because I was so desperate to go. I said I spoke fluent Japanese, which of course I didn't. So I had to set about learning Japanese. And I was very lucky. For the first year, I lived with a family. And they just decided that I was going to learn to speak, read, and write, and they taught me. And so I learned a bit like a child. And I was going backwards and forwards to the university every day, and it became increasingly clear to me that I had the wrong personality for ceramics, because the thing about ceramics is that it takes an awful long time to make something, and then you put it in the kiln, and it cracks, or something dreadful happens to it, and then you've got to start all over again. And so I realized it was no longer for me, so I very quietly shifted towards working with other materials, so I learnt a lot about printmaking, as you said, learnt about Japanese paper, traditional pigments, all sorts of things, and I slowly moved from 3 dimensions to 2. So this is one of the earliest ones, which is on Japanese paper. And the thing about Japanese paper is that it's made of very long fibers, which makes it very strong, unlike Western paper. If you work on Western paper, the minute you make it wet, it kind of goes like that, and you can't do anything with it. Japanese paper, because of the way it's made and the fibers are so long and they're knitted together, you can make it wet and dry, and it expands and contracts evenly. So I just developed a way of working, actually using the paper as a material rather than a surface. If you think of Western ways of working, generally speaking, I think probably in all cases, paper and canvas are used as a surface. So canvas is primed, the paint goes onto it, and it just sort of sits there. The thing about Japanese materials, the paper is absorbent, the color goes into the fibers, so actually it becomes an object in itself. And so I became obsessed with that, which was fine while I was in Japan because I had easy access to all these materials. So when I got back here, I wanted to find a way of keeping the spirit of that, but working with materials I could get more easily here, like canvas. So this is one of the largest works I did, which was a series that came out of some sketches I did in the Lake District, which was an attempt to capture the nature of the landscape but without painting the landscape. Because actually what makes the landscape in the Lake District is the weather. The speed of the weather that just kind of comes sweeping in and disappears. So I did a whole series of drawings which were really about that movement. And then I translated them into a series of works on canvas. So to explain this one, this is about 6 feet by 8, roughly, so nearly 2 meters wide. And it's actually a painting which I did first, and then I've cut it up into thousands of tiny 1-inch squares, which have then all been moved round and put back down again. And what that did is it disrupted and disjointed those lines I'd put in the original painting, which means that you've got this feeling of constant movement, a bit like a waterfall. The only problem with this series of works was, for me, it was a way of drawing and a way of capturing movement. But whenever people saw them, they were more obsessed with the idea that I was patient enough to do them, which was not the point. Yeah. So this one was bought by the Yale Centre for British Art and is again from that Lake District series and came out of those drawings of the weather. Yeah, so this was another series. So I'm very, there's a combination of extraordinary level of control in what I do. So you can, with all those squares, you know, you've got to be very accurate. They all had to be perfectly cut. So it's this balance between control and serendipity. So with this series, I actually, the front of the painting was originally the back of the painting. So I'm not going to show it to you, but what was on the other side was what I was working on, and then at some point I turned it round. And then you're presented with something you haven't necessarily controlled because it was all going on the back of the painting. So I like that element of sort of not quite knowing where you're going to be going. Yeah, now in this series I was actually I was experimenting with working on Japanese paper, which I've then laid down onto canvas. So the paper itself is very thin, so you're seeing through the fibers of the paper and onto painting, which is on the canvas behind. So you've almost got 3 layers, and I like the sort of softness and ambiguity of the surface. It's almost as if your eyes can't quite focus on it and you don't know where things are coming from. It's almost as if, instead of painting by imposing something on the surface, it's almost like archaeology. I feel as if you're pulling it out the other way.
Yes. Like sculptors.
Like sculptors, yes, exactly. Yeah. And so it was a series where, instead of using paper, I actually worked on both sides of muslin, which has then been laid down onto linen behind. So again, you've got multiple layers. Oh, that's the one I'm standing in front of in that photograph. So that's another one, again, using muslin. So the main white square is actually on the linen behind, and the black marks are on both sides of the muslin in front. So again, you've got that slight ambiguity of space and distance. I think that may be, oh no, there's one more. Again, very hard to see in my work reproduces so badly. Again, this is muslin with ink and laid down onto canvas. And I think that might be the last. No, there's another one. Oh, God. Okay, yes, so this was a series. This was a painting that came out of some drawings I did. So when we had to close the academy, and I then was in my studio during lockdown, but I was effectively on Zoom sometimes for 5-6 hours a day. And I knew that if I wasn't able to carry on working, I would have gone quietly mad. So I just basically started doing drawings that I could do while I was on Zoom, which was endless dots. I think people thought I might be taking copious notes, but in fact I was doing these drawings. And this painting came out of that. But it's very hard to see in reproduction, but I use a traditional dip pen. So I dip it into the colour and then make lots of dots. And what that gives you is intense colour when you first make the dots, and then as the ink runs out, it becomes paler. So you can almost read them in time. Each one is a new set of
Yes.
dots. Oh, there's even more. God, I didn't realise. Yeah, this is the most recent one. Again, so I very often work in diptych because, again, that gives you a physical difference between the two halves. And you can't see in reproduction, but the two halves are actually, the stretches are of different depths. So that gives you a sort of physicality to the canvases that you don't get on one flat surface. And again, this is using muslin laid down onto linen and dots and marks on both sides. That really is it. Yes.
Thank you very much.
I'll leave that one
yes.
there for now.
Thank you very much. So can we talk a little about the RA schools now? Just to give you a little bit of background, the schools offer a 3-year full-time course, which, believe it or not, is free. So can you imagine what it's like for these early career artists
Yes.
to be able to be part of the Royal Academy, to be surrounded by all these amazing artists, and to spend 3 years there? So can you tell us a little bit more about the schools, please?
So as I said, back in 1769, the academicians met to found the schools, and it was a very simple mechanism for the transfer of knowledge from one generation of artists to the next, because the founding academicians had, some of them had studied in European academies, many had travelled to European countries, and they were aware that we didn't have an academy here, so they felt that gap. And there's something rather wonderful about having that simple intergenerational mechanism. And in our founding rules, in effect, it says something along the lines of the education should be free to those who can benefit from it. And, you know, if you think back to Turner, who was a student at the schools, his father was a barber. Could he have afforded fees, I wonder? Possibly not. Probably not. So generations of British artists have been able to become artists because they had a free education at the Royal Academy.
How is it funded?
Well, the summer exhibition.
Of course.
The summer exhibition,
Yes.
I mean, that now
Yes,
doesn't cover
yes.
the entire cost. So we have some various scholarships, and we have supporters, donors, we fundraise. It's a constant, because I should have said this right at the beginning. Many of you may know this, many of you may not. The Royal Academy does not get any public funding, never has had any public funding. We are completely self-funding.
Same as the Dulwich Picture Gallery.
So, and of course, the trouble is, because we say royal over the door, people think we are incredibly wealthy, but we have to raise all our funds, which means not only are we raising sponsorship to put on the exhibitions, which are becoming, in the current climate, increasingly expensive with shipping costs and all the rest of it. And I can't even tell you what's happened to our energy bill. Because interestingly, when we had to close the building, we only saved about 10% on our energy bill by closing the building. Because, of course, we closed the building with exhibitions in place, and artworks need to be in climate-controlled conditions 24/7. Whether the public are in the building or not.
Yes.
So that shows you where our core costs are. So in terms of the schools, I mean, there have been various iterations over the years, but now we have roughly 50 students spread over 3 years. And Brexit has complicated our lives hugely, because we've never been able to take completely, well, not for the last 10 years, I don't think, more than 10 years, we've not been able to take students from outside the EU because we don't have sort of university status, which means we can't sponsor visas. But we used to be able to take students from the EU, and as a result of that, not only did we get students from the EU, but for example, we had students who were originally from Brazil but had a Portuguese passport. So the schools were very international. The Royal Academy was very international when we were founded. Of the founding 30-odd academicians, I think nearly a third were from other European countries. So we have always been and want to be an open and international place. But now we're really struggling because we cannot take EU students because they need visas. So we can take anybody here with pre-settled status and all the rest of it, but that's a big blow to us because with 50 students, we're too small.
Yes.
If we joined up to a university so we could then get the ability to...
Oh, right, yes.
The costs of doing all the sort of paperwork and...
You mean the admin alone?
The admin alone and all the sort of box ticking you had to do, because then you become a properly governed university.
Yes.
With 50 students, it's just not financially possible. Also, our independence is much more important. So that's where we are with our intake of students. So we roughly take 50 a year. Generally speaking, we take students who've... I think our average age comes out at about 28. So we take people who've graduated, have been out in the world for a bit, and have been doing their own work, and they come back in for further study and training. What's important about the 3 years, because very often people say, God, 3 years, that's way too long. You know, make it shorter and you can have twice as many students. What's really important about the 3 years is that it's long enough from a teaching point of view to work with a student, to maybe unpick completely what they've been doing up until now, and then support them in building it back and consolidating.
So who are the teachers?
So we have members of staff. So we have three members of staff, one of each for each year. And then we have a lot of visiting members of artists and people who come in, and visiting lecturers. So, and we have, I mean, the other thing we're very fortunate about is that we have very good workshop provision, because increasingly in art schools, because workshops are very expensive. They take up a lot of space, you need a lot of kit, particularly subjects like printmaking and ceramics. They take up space, you need equipment and all the rest of it. So we're very lucky to have a full set of workshops. And then the other thing we can commit to is giving each student their own little, it may be only a few square meters, but they each get their own space they can call their own. Because some art schools now have expanded to such an extent that they sort the students' kind of hot desk. Which is not the same as having your own space where you can, you know, pin your own pictures up on the walls. Or
so you mean, in a way, they have their own little studio space?
Yeah, they have their own little studio space. And that, again, is part of being there, because what we do is, at the beginning of each academic year, the head of schools, it's like an enormous bit of dinner party planning. So takes the second and third years who are already there, the incoming first years, and allocates them spaces. So you then get these interesting conversations between a first year and a third year, or people doing very different work, or people doing very similar work, or sometimes people get on so well, they then become a collaboration. So part of being in the schools is, I mean, obviously teaching is part of it, but it's actually the learning between the actual students themselves is very important. And for that, you all need a little space. You can call your own.
Exactly.
And we are about, I mean, if for those of you who've walked between the two parts of the Royal Academy, you will have seen, if you'd looked across the corridor, I mean, it crosses like that, along the corridor of the Royal Academy schools. They need a bit of a facelift. Well, they need more than that, a bit of renovation. So we've just, within the last 2 weeks, decanted, if that's the right word, the schools into other spaces in the building. And we hope to start renovation work on the schools in the next couple of months. I mean, you can imagine what it's been like finalising a building project in the current climate, with inflation doing what it's doing every day. But that's what we're not, it's a listed building. The schools were so brilliantly designed that you don't need to do anything to the layout of them. But there are too many stairs, which means we couldn't take a student who used a wheelchair, for example, which is just not acceptable. So we're levelling it all out and, you know, sorting out the wiring and the, you know. Oh, well, the other hilarious thing, of course, when those studios were built, kind of one plug per studio was plenty. So things like that,
Yes.
you know.
Right. Just taking a sideways step, I just wanted to touch on art education in schools, ordinary schools.
Yes.
Because there's something quite fundamentally different in learning about art and learning about academic subjects. And art has been dropped from a lot of the curricula.
Yes.
And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your thoughts on what is happening.
Thank you. I'm very glad you asked that question because we're cross, basically.
Yes.
So the Royal Academy is very clear that we are in a position, probably uniquely because we're completely independent of government funding, we are in a position to advocate very strongly for the provision of art education from 0 to 100. Art education has almost vanished from state schools, which is truly shocking. And I'm very clear that I do not want to be the president where, you know, in 50 years' time, the president thinks, well, where are we going to get these new academicians from? Because nobody's going to art school. And nobody will go to art school if they haven't done art
At school,
in schools.
yes.
So we are very clear as an organisation that our values are that art should be, I mean, I think it's a human right, frankly. I think all children should have access to this in schools. So one of our longer-term projects, because obviously we're still building back from the crisis of the pandemic, but we have got a learning studio, we have got a learning programme. Schools are still not quite coming back on site in the way that they were because of, you know, I mean, there's still quite a lot of COVID about. So we are actively working with local schools within Westminster.
Oh, right.
And our long-term ambition is to have online resources, is how I will put it, that art teachers or any teacher anywhere in the country, or in fact it could be anywhere in the world, could use to build a sort of some kind of teaching method or online resources if their school is not able to provide a dedicated art teacher.
Yes, thank you.
And that's, at the moment, the best we can do.
Yes.
I mean, we learnt a lot during lockdown, so our sort of learning team did amazing things online. We have a programme, and again, this is all part of the ecology again, it's that word again, but we have a programme where some of the Royal Academy school students work with A-level students. It all went online during lockdown, but they tutor and mentor A-level students. So we learnt a lot, and we can build on that and roll that out in a way. But no, I mean, it's a real problem. And of course, the independent schools all offer art and music.
But it's the state schools. And I think it's our duty as parents and grandparents to actually try and encourage our schools not to drop art education or even to restart it. I think that's very important.
And I think the other thing which I think comes out of that, and again, I advocate for this within the Academy, is that when I reflect on, you know, when I was at art school, and I think back to the people I was at art school with, there were certainly fellow students who, I mean, now probably would have a sort of some kind of diagnosis. A lot of art students, by the way, are dyslexic, very high proportion statistic. I don't know what the figures are, very high proportion. Again, for them, words is not, you know, not their best medium.
Yes.
But I can remember fellow students who were extraordinary once they were allowed to function visually. Yes. Because when I first went to art school, you could get into art school just on your portfolio. You didn't have to write any words, you could just get in visually. That no longer happens. And I reflect on what we are losing by losing what I call different intelligences, because Those intelligences see the world differently, interpret things differently, think differently. But because so much of our education now is through words and through a certain amount of rote learning, what are we losing? So I think I want the Royal Academy to be a home for what I call different intelligence.
Wonderful, wonderful. I want to finish with the collection.
Yes.
The permanent collection. Now, if you can tell us a little bit about its history and what it includes and so on. But I would also like to tell everyone that there's a wonderful short video on the RA website where Rebecca takes us through what is it, 5 or 6?
5 or 6.
Yes, paintings through the years, starting with Constable's Clouds, Turner's Ships at Sea, and then you finish with Angelica Kaufman. So it's well worth it because there are only a couple of minutes each that she describes. So it's worth looking at that. So can you tell us a little more about the collection, please?
The Royal Academy collection is unusual in the way it's constituted. So it's formed out of a combination of Royal Academicians' diploma works. So to explain that, when you're elected as a Royal Academician, you are initially called RA Elect. And the first thing you have to do is donate a piece of your work to the Royal Academy. And then the word elect goes and you become a full Royal Academician and you get a signed diploma from, well, it would have been the Queen. Now we've got to re-engrave the plate because it will be from the King. So the choice of the diploma work becomes a conversation between the elected academician and the Director of Collections. And because this work, it will be permanently in the Royal Academy collection and will effectively represent you as an artist to the future. So we do have a Turner, we do have Constables because they had to give a diploma work. So it's a very important conversation. So we have a lot of diploma works in our collection. Then the other thing that we have is what you might call a learning collection for the schools. So Royal Academicians would have gone travelling, they'd have gone on the grand tour maybe, and they would have bought a plaster cast of a famous statue.
There are an awful lot of them.
Back. There's a lot of them. Shipped them back, and they entered the Royal Academy collection. And when the schools are renovated, we hope to finish the work by the end of next year, we will restore the what's called the cast corridor. So when you walk between the two buildings, the crossover point is the cast corridor to the schools, and a lot of those casts will come back. And that will be restored to its former glory. So we've got a combination of art to learn from and these diploma works. But what that does is that emphasises that what is unique about the Royal Academy is that in our galleries we have exhibitions of what you might call the artistic canon. So in some people's minds, if that's all they look at, they think we're a bit like a Kunsthalle. You know, we just put on exhibitions. But we're actually much more than that so we have the canon exhibited in the galleries upstairs. We have Royal Academicians who are making, living, breathing artists and architects. And then on another level beyond that, we have the students who are effectively working on the future. So we've no idea what they're going to come up with, but we've got the past, the present, and the future all under one roof, and it's all about the making of art, really. So when you think of other galleries, most of that is about the acquisition and the collection of art that's already there. But with us, it's that journey of making that's right at the heart of the Academy, which goes back to those meetings either side of Christmas in 1768, 1769, which was about, one generation making art, talking to the next generation making art.
Yes, because the exhibitions are enormous, and I would think that the planning for them, and I know we spoke about that when we first met, the problem during lockdown, because you book an exhibition, many, many years in advance because you're borrowing work and so on. And all that had to be
It got
on hold.
stuck.
Yes.
So the whole thing, so we work roughly 5 years ahead because you have to. And because you have to know, I don't know how our curators do it, because you come up with a concept for an exhibition, and very often that concept will hinge around being able to get, I don't know, 4 key paintings from 4 different collections all around the world. And if you only get 3 of them, then you think, well, do we go ahead with just 3 of them? Or can we find another one? And each one of those has to be, those are individual negotiations. Is that work promised somewhere else at that time, so you can't have it? Well, if we shifted it 6 months, could we then get all 4 of them?
Yes.
I mean, they are so complicated, these conversations. And of course, they were all perfectly, like perfect in clockwork, all perfectly in place until 17th of March 2020. And then the music stopped all over the world. And we had Picasso on paper in our galleries, which was due to go to the States, I think. And then I think we actually had Angelica Kaufmann due to come to us, and that got stuck maybe in Germany, I can't remember. And things got stuck. And so curators all run around. I mean, it was like a big bowl of spaghetti, and they were sort of trying to unravel it. And, you know, sadly, in the end, there were some exhibitions which we weren't able to do because the loans run out. You know, they said, we can't have the painting anymore, so then the exhibition falls. Terribly complicated. We were very lucky with the Francis Bacon, though, because we had, the Bacon was due to open in January 2021. And then, of course, we had the second lockdown, big, long lockdown. And immediately we came back after Christmas. We had to have this meeting where we thought, dare we risk these unbelievably valuable paintings being put on planes, created and put on planes with absolutely no certainty that this lockdown isn't going to go on for 5 months, in which case we'd have flown them to London, they'd sit in the galleries in crates, and we'd have to fly them back again. So we had to cancel it because we couldn't risk doing that to those valuable works. So we, with a very heavy heart, we cancelled it. And then, you know, our extraordinary curators started conversations, and we managed to bring the exhibition back exactly a year later.
Yes.
And it's one of the most successful exhibitions we've ever had.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, it's a testament to the skills and the international network of professionals.
Yes, and I think that's part of what we need to understand, because we benefit from visiting an exhibition, enjoying an exhibition, and I don't think many of us actually appreciate the huge amount of work and preparation and planning that goes behind, because apart from anything else, it is globally interdependent.
Yep, absolutely, absolutely, yeah. And of course, a lot of what goes into an exhibition is now being hit by, you know, international air travel costs, you know, shipping costs, energy costs, all those, you know, are really hitting the budgets of exhibitions.
Right. I can open it now to questions. We've got 2 roving microphones. I will hand them out to a couple of our volunteers. Just check that they're on, please. And if you just put your hand up, then I will ask for yes, we have one on the left. Can you put your hand up again, please? Yes. And another one over here. So the lady. Okay.
Hi, Rebecca. I have never got any formal education in art, but I am always a massive fan of classical art, like old masters or Greek marble sculptures. I noticed the fabulous lemon from the summer exhibition ended up at St. Helens near Bishopgate at Hiscox foyer. I have so many questions and comments. It's overwhelming. I will just try to remember. The first question is about British art. British art has always been underappreciated and undervalued. If you go to commercial art gallery, like Renoir costs like 2 mil, and a Millet costs £5,000. So how do we promote British art? And the second one, I always think RA and Tate Modern, they are in massive, beautiful old heritage building, but it's a bit spacious with not much going inside compared to V&A, which is stuffed with treasures like a glamorous charity shop. So how do we make the most use of this building and turn it into a self-sufficient green building? And will RA ever do NFT? Because it's digital asset, it's the new trend. You can use it to raise charity money. You can use it to help artists to truly make a living. This is all I can think about. Thank you.
Right, can I ask you to keep your questions simpler, please? Otherwise, one question will take over most of the time. Rebecca.
So very quickly, British art, I think, I mean, in my lifetime, the profile of British art has changed hugely. I think the generation of, you know, Damien Hirst and Tracy Emin really put British art much more on the map. I think this is a massive generalization, but I think we are probably a spoken word culture. You know, if you think of theatre and perhaps Shakespeare is probably the core of our culture more than visual art, but I think British art schools have always punched above their weight. I think they've always been attractive as places to come and study, and I think in some ways people have learned at British art schools and gone back to different parts of the world and taken that message with them. So I think, I think British art has a bright future. In terms of green and sustainability in our building, that is very much on our agenda, and it's on the agenda of all galleries and arts organisations, because we know, you know, we've all got to do better. It's difficult when you've got a listed historic building, and also it's difficult when what you do, as I've just said, involves shipping artworks around the world. But I think we're very lucky in the Royal Academy. We have many, well, as elected architects, we have some of the world's top architects, and I keep prodding them and saying, you're the ones that know, you're at the cutting edge of all this technology. Come and tell me how we can do something.
Excellent. It's wonderful to take advantage of
well,
your own.
If you've got these people in your organisation,
exactly.
Take advantage of them.
There's a lady, no, hold on. There's a lady over there, please, first, yes.
So I love the summer exhibition. It's fun. It's democratic because of the open submissions.
Can you hold it closer? We can't, yeah.
Democratic because of the open submissions. It gets people in to look at art that wouldn't normally look, and it's fundraising for an art school. So just your views on why are the critics sometimes less than complimentary about it?
Well, it's every year. I mean, it's weird. Every year they come to the summer exhibition. They know what it is. It is not a curated art exhibition. You know, it is. We work with what comes through the door. I think they fundamentally don't really get it. You know, they don't quite. It's not curated. It's a different animal. So, yeah.
There are individual galleries are sort of curated, aren't they?
So you've got to have this, you've got this balance between, we need to show as many works as we can, so we need to pack the galleries full, but then, you know, some galleries we hang more sparsely, and sometimes we slightly curate how we hang certain galleries, or, you know, one. For example, this year in the, what we call the lecture room, Conrad Shawcross was very clear from the very beginning, he wanted an entire wall of clouds. So in the first selection, we were just going through looking for clouds. And it was fantastically effective. But the critics wouldn't necessarily give you credit. You know, they just think, oh, it's a wall of clouds. I know, it's an ongoing thing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi.
Whoop, which one?
There's one I'm Simone de Gale from Simone de Gale Architects. I found it really interesting about what you said about art being taught in the state schools, and it's really shocking actually, because I learned art at school, obviously. So I was just wondering what the RA is doing and what we could do as a society to bring art back into the schools again, because I think it's so important for the young children to be creative at that age.
Well, I think those who care about these things, and I think if you care about arts and culture in your society, I think we all have to speak up.
Exactly.
And as I said earlier, we're working on ways of making ways of teaching art available. I mean, it's not we can't do it immediately. We're working on it, and I just think anybody who cares needs to support organisations that are in that field and speak up.
One thing you can support the RA is become a friend.
Well, it's funny you were going to say, because I was going to say that if anybody's concerned about what they're going to get people for Christmas, I did just want to say that one of the other things we've managed to do in the last month, in conjunction with the William Kentridge exhibition, by the way, which is fabulous, and you should all come and see, is that we have changed the definition of youth. So we had a young friends category, which I think used to be to 25, and we have now changed it so you can be a young friend up to the age of 35.
Goodness.
So
That's wonderful.
Well, because what we realise is that there's a sort of a cliff edge, and if you are 25, you've got student loans, you've got your first job, whatever, and that's a cliff, and it's a discretionary spend.
Yes.
So if you need to get something for Christmas for somebody under 35.
Yes. One of the things I do every year for Christmas, which is an easy present, is I give my son, daughter-in-law, and grandchildren an annual subscription.
There you are.
Yes.
A model friend.
Thank you very much. It was
Closer,
fascinating.
please.
It was fascinating. And I was about to complain about the fact that the Friends membership was carrying on throughout. We weren't given a rebate for having been a friend during lockdown, but having heard you, I think it was money well spent, so I'm not complaining about that.
Well,
that wasn't actually what I was going to talk about. I wanted to compliment you as well on some of the smaller exhibitions, because, in fact, the artists that you are showing, particularly upstairs, are people I've never necessarily heard of. Milton Avery was just wonderful. Kentridge I'm going to next week. And these are artists that I don't think would be normally brought over. They're not blockbusters. Yeah. But they are fascinating, and they're people, they really do show a completely different side. I know you're very concerned with the schools, but this is, for people like myself who hadn't learned very much about all these other artists, they are absolutely fascinating and very, very interesting.
Well, that's absolutely, I mean, that is actually core to our programme, and I think to some extent that's where you get the sort of nature of the organisation, because academicians, artists, are on all the committees, including exhibitions committee. And so a lot of it is the voice of the artist. And artists are magpies. They look around, they don't necessarily care how famous somebody is. If somebody's work is really interesting, they want other people to see it. So what we really love to do is show people artists they didn't even know they wanted to see, which is like Milton Avery, or earlier in the year we had the Japanese artist Kyosai, who only once been shown outside Japan in the British Museum in 1993. Hugely successful, a wonderful artist, but nobody really knew him. So that is at the core of what we do. And going back to your friend subscription during lockdown, we were very aware of this, and the truth is that our friends, as I said, we get no government funding, so our friends are our core funding. And so we wrote all these letters to people. I mean, really, we were crowdfunded by our friends during the lockdown, and we're hugely grateful, because otherwise we may not have survived. So everybody who's a friend, thank you, because we survived.
One last question, because no, the lady at the back. One last and very brief answer, please. We need to finish in 2 minutes.
2 minutes, right.
Is it working?
Is it at the back there?
Yes, at the back there. I think they're having problem with the
Hello?
mic.
Yes.
Yes,
we
that's
can hear
fine.
you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for this speech, all the work you do, and having to, dealing with this institution that has all these different aspects, the art school, the big exhibition, the smaller ones, the fantastic gift shop as well. And I wanted to ask you, those incredible exhibitions, even before I came to live in London, the Royal Academy was the one place where I always stopped, because I knew that the exhibitions were always going to be fantastic. And also, the way you do them, the size you have is very manageable in an hour, which is, I think, a big plus for most people. I mean, I can spend more time, but if I only want to spend an hour, I can go there for an hour. So my question is, considering that you have the art school and the exhibition aspects, is there a collaboration between the two? Do you choose an exhibition, considering what the students are working on or who they are?
Okay, I think that's enough.
Yes, a very quick one.
Yes.
So not necessarily, no, we wouldn't choose an exhibition specifically in relation to the students, but one of the amazing things about being a student in the Royal Academy is you have free access to these exhibitions. You can go in as many times as you like. And again, some exhibitions are discoveries, I'm sure for the students, Milton Avery and Kilsyth were discoveries as well, so. And the students also have their graduation exhibition within the Royal Academy, so we, again, exhibit the next generation together with previous generations.
Rebecca, this has been an absolute delight. I think everyone will agree that it's been a wonderful start to our KCWC year. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And our president now will give us the formal.
The formal.
Thank you.
Can you hear me? Yes. I just wanted to say it was fascinating, the talk, and thank you very much for accepting our invitation to come and share your talk with our members. And as a small token of gratitude and esteem, I'd like to present you with an honorary membership of our club.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, beautiful. Thank you so much. Wonderful. Thank you. Oh, they're beautiful. Beautiful.
We got one in a box to make it easier for you to take it back.
I would like to announce the upcoming events. As you can see, on the 13th of October, we've got new members' coffee mornings. I'm very much looking forward to welcome our new members at the Royal Yacht Club. And also, our next general meeting will be on the 3rd of November, and we've got a fantastic speaker, Emma Soames. Thank you, Vivian, for inviting Emma Soames to speak at our general meeting next month. I strongly advise you to register for this general meeting because we have a new venue with limited seating. So to ensure your place, please go to our website and register. I also have a few announcements from our activity leaders. There are still places available to go to the Crucible by Arthur Miller on the 18th of October. And on the 19th of October, there are places for a country walk, which will be guided by a professional walking guide and a pub lunch afterwards. On the same date, on the 19th of October in the afternoon, there are 2 last tickets available for Antiques and Design for the Charleston Farm event, so please sign up online for the last 2 places. And the last event is very exciting. On the 8th of December, we've got the Christmas cocktail party with drinks reception, raffle draw, and performance at the Pall Mall Room at the Army and Navy Club, exclusively reserved for the KCWC members. And this event is up on the website now, so please sign up, and I hope you all can make it. Now, Kathleen have an announcement for our charity for Christmas. Also, I'd like to say that those who booked for their luncheon after this, you have to be seated by noon and place your order by 12:15 p.m. So please, without any delay, make your way to the restaurant after this. Is Robert Hartman still there? Okay. Okay, so that's all for today. And thank you again, Rebecca Salter and Eve. Thank you.